The best method for replacing round core and hex core guitar strings. Coming up. All right, I'll be honest. For decades, I really didn't even know there was a difference between round core and hex core guitar strings. I didn't even know that was a distinction to be made in the guitar string world. It was probably decades before I realized that. I just knew that different brands sounded differently, and I preferred some over others, and even within a similar brand, there would be different models of strings and they would sound different. Well, at some point, I figured out, I just learned through education, probably internet education, that there was a difference between these types of strings. And that if I wasn't fully aware of the difference, I was not really cluing into one of the great classic duos of guitar tone, and that's round core and hex core strings. So I'm gonna show you how to string these up. The fact is, you can string the round core strings improperly, and you will not get the optimum tone out of those strings. So I'm going to show one method of stringing both of these that will make sure you're getting the best tone out of your strings, whether or not they're hex core or round core. So I'll show you that coming up. Okay, before we get started, I want to just explain what this distinction between hex core and round core is. What I have in front of me is a round core string, and when the core is I'm referring to is the inner string. This really only applies to the wound strings. So the core wire here is a round core. Hex core strings have a hex-shaped core. This round core string has a small flat that's been stamped into the core wire. You can see it reflecting there at my fingertip. That flat stamped portion of the string extends a short distance here at the very end of the string, and that is used to stabilize these wrap wires. When the wrap wires reach that, they bite into that flat portion, and it holds the tension on the wrapped strings and keeps everything from, well, basically keeps the string from going dead. But it keeps that wrap tension on the string by allowing the wound wire to bite into the edges of that flat portion of the core wire. A hex core doesn't require that flat because it is the hex shape of the core wire accomplishes the same thing by allowing the wrap wire to bite into the corners of the hex-shaped core wire. But with a round core string, once that is trimmed off, you lose the benefit of that stabilizing the wrap, that flat. So in order to prevent any problems from trimming that off, you have to string your guitar the proper way. And luckily, the method I'm going to show you works just as well for hex and round core strings, and it will make sure you get the best tone and best string life out of both types of strings. Okay, so I've got most of this guitar strung up, and the plain strings, the unwound strings, really you would do the same with the same method that I'm going to show you. This is the first wound string, but this method really is focused on preventing any sort of problem with the wound strings based upon the distinction between round and hex core. So I've got the guitar mainly strung up here. I'm starting on the wound strings. I've already got the D string on. And again, the distinction here is with the wound strings when we're talking about round and hex core. You may not even know particularly what brand, with the brand you prefer, as to whether or not they are round or hex core strings. I know when I was a teenager, I found I preferred the old style Dean Markley strings and GHS boomers. And years later, I realized that, oh, those are both round core strings. And the round core strings I find have a little chunkier sound, and hex core a little snappier on the wound strings. And I find it's a good way to tailor each guitar to what you want, and I find I use both types on different guitars. But anyway, for this method, it'll work perfectly for both round and hex core. So if you're not sure what kind of strings you're using when it comes to round or hex core, it's not going to matter with this method. This will work fine for both, and work very well for both. And I'm going to show you how to do it with the Gibson style through the post style tuners. Fender, I'll show you that in a minute. That requires a different method with the slot post tuners. So I'll do the A string here, and what we want to do is pass the string through the post. I like to get a couple of wraps on the post, and just through feel here I'm going to judge how much slack I want in the string. But once we get it the amount of slack we want, once the string's passed through the post, you double the string back tightly, put a kink through the string where it passed through the post there, go under the slack string, pull that tight, and then double it over the slack string, making a bend in the other direction, a sharp bend, and then string it up. Put tension on the string. Let the wrap go underneath, or the string go under where it starts there. And then, and this is an important detail, once it's brought to tension, that is when you can trim the string. You don't want to trim it prior to that, to there being tension on the string, because the wraps are not fully stabilized. So the effect of this method is doubling it over like that locks the wrap by both bending the string and having a bend in the core and the wrap, and also having the tension of the string itself holding down that wrap. So once we've got it to tension, then you can trim the string. Let me get my wire cutters here. So I'll do the same with the E, and then I'll go on to show you how to handle it with a slot post like a Fender. Okay, on to the Fender slot post style. Oh, I should mention too that what I showed previously applies also to obviously acoustic guitar strings that would be round or hex core. So, but with the Fender style here, we need to handle the string differently because we obviously cannot wrap it over and double it back on itself like we can with a through the post hole style tuner. So with this method, there's a couple of details we have to pay attention to. One is, in order to lock that wrap wire down, we're going to do two things. The usual method of doing this is to bend it over sharply. Using needle nose pliers is always a good idea because you get a nice crisp bend in the string. And then we're going to trim it at about 3/4 of an inch, and about 3/4 usually ends up being about what it is, distance between the headstock here and a tuning post or button on a Fender style headstock. But when we trim this, what we're going to do is we're going to take a little extra measure to stabilize this wrap. This bend will stabilize the wrap wire beyond it. But once we trim it here, we've cut off the barb, and we've only got that to stabilize the wrap. What I'm going to do now is a suggestion that a good friend of mine, a well-known Austin repairman and luthier, Ed Reynolds, suggested to me, and I find it really is a good idea. And that is, when you trim this, rather than just making a crisp trim, You bend it a bit, and with the pliers themselves, and then you kind of mash down on it here, and then you do your trim. So you've got a trim that is not quite flush, and the effect of this is it stabilizes this wrap even from here to here. And if you do this with a clean cut, you can actually feel this wrap wire here wiggle. If you want to experiment with that yourself, you can kind of see what I'm talking about. But this is sort of a double measure of protection. You bend it over. This is just, I'm going to just toss this string out, but I'll just show you how you do that again. You bend it over. Oop. Not like that. You bend it over. Nice crisp bend. And then when you trim it, bend it a bit like this. Kind of have a little oblique trim to it. And that will also make a little barb there on where you cut it that keeps everything together. So let's go on to the A string here, and I'll use that same method. I'm going to bend it about 1.5 past there. I'd rather not have 2. I don't really want that many wraps. But we bend it over, nice crisp bend here. And then we're going to trim it about 3/4 of an inch using that kind of oblique method of trimming it. Put it in the post and tighten up the string. Let's go on to the E string. Again, we're going to kind of cut that at a little bit of an oblique angle, slowly kind of mash it down. And then you've got that well stabilized. That is it. All right, I hope that was useful. Showing that there really is a distinction between these two types of strings, and that you need to be aware of that when you're stringing up your guitar. The one method I showed will work with both hex core and round core strings and allow you to get the best tone out of both of those types of strings. And you know, the reality is that your choice of guitar strings really can be one of the most effective ways to tailor the tone for you with your specific guitar. And one of those details is the distinction between round core and hex core strings. It could also be something like the difference between pure nickel and nickel-plated steel strings. But you need to be aware of those differences from the get-go so you can make up your mind for yourself what those differences in strings really add up to a difference in tone in your guitar. But to start with, you've got to string it up right. So anyway, I hope that was helpful. If you like the video, please click like. If you want notifications of future videos, click the bell. You'll get those, and there will be more videos. And if you've got questions or comments of your own about this, please leave them below in the comments section. And once again, thanks for letting ThroBak be part of your search for great guitar tone.